Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm delighted to be back on the Investopia stage. My name is Natasha Tarak, CNBC Middle East correspondent based right up the road in Dubai. I am thrilled to be having this conversation today about black swans and gray swans, policy and strategy in an uncertain world. And I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists. His Excellency Abdullah bin Tuq Al-Mari, UAE Minister of Economy and Chairman of Investopia, and His Excellency Monsieur Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former Prime Minister of the Republic of France and the French government's Special Representative for China. Now, a black swan event, which we've heard quite a lot about, defined as a rare, unexpected event that has significant human consequences, typically extremely negative and difficult to predict. But what's less talked about are gray swan events, one that is possible and known, potentially highly significant, but considered still unlikely to happen. On January 27th, a little-known Chinese AI chatbot called DeepSeek was introduced to the US marketplace. The impact was cataclysmic. In a single day, it wiped $600 billion off of NVIDIA's market value, the biggest single stock drop for a US company in history, and wiped out nearly $1 trillion from US stocks. That week, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, author of the book The Black Swan, warned that this was just the beginning, that in the future, such market drops could be 2 to 3 times worse. Now, Your Excellency, Minister Al-Mari, I'd like to start with you. The UAE has been pouring billions of dollars into AI investments in its push to be a world leader in the sector. What black or gray swan events do you think about the most when it comes to AI and singularity? And is our economic system too fragile to such shocks because wealth is concentrated in such a small number of companies?
Dasha, thank you so much for this question, actually, first of all, to start off with. And I think it's, I do have the gray swans as a thinking every year. I have 6 gray swans. I'd like to speak about them. Some of them flew away. Some of them came and landed. Some of my gray swans are very darker to the black swans, and some of my gray swans are very lighter to the white swans. I think everyone now is going to search on Google and look for what does a gray swan looks like, and there is a gray swan. But they happens to be. And every year there's a change of the gray swans when we look at it. AI, of course, is part of it. One of my gray swans on AI is the AI intelligence in the population. How ready is our population, citizens, ready to use DeepSeek, for instance? Extreme use of it, and how do you use others as well, artificial intelligence technology around that. One of my gray swans is perma-pandemic. The other is debt crisis. Some is as well around the real estate aspects. The escalation in the Taiwan, area, sea. And I think that's something which is as well we need to look at because we need to anticipate. Now, the UAE and its leadership as well, we need to be very agile and adaptive. And so we need to keep our swans very close and very to really understand where we're going and how do we adapt our paths, how do we adapt our trade routes, our investments globally, and how do we make changes as well to adapt the world challenges that work forward. Of course, AI is a big investment for the UAE, and we're going to still be investing in it, continue investing in AI, and in the talent and skills in AI, because we believe that AI is going to create a revolution, of course, in the technology, and we should expect as well more and more such like black swans of AI happening. But my gray swans are now tends to look like more of a lighter gray swans rather than the darker ones I have.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Monsieur Raffarin, you are an avid supporter of Beijing and of President Xi himself, and you have spent years talking about the importance of having closer relations with China. Do you see Chinese technology or the Chinese economic policies, after all the second biggest economy in the world, triggering black or gray swan market events elsewhere in the world? And what do those scenarios look like to you?
Thank you very much for inviting me in such a beautiful event. And I'm very happy to be there. There is one main reason. The reason is you are a country here, and in this country we can talk with US and with China. And it's very important right now.
It is.
Because our world is very nervous and very dangerous. We have war in Europe, in our country. And we have a lot of tension. And every day we heard Mr. Trump announce a new tax, a new tariff. And it's very difficult to be predictable. In China, we said a good friend is a man who is predictable.
Yes.
Now it's very difficult in this world, which is very dangerous. I think that China has get a very high level of development right now. They will have a lot of problems in real estate, they have many financial difficulties, but they are as clever as us. They work more than us, and they are 1.4 billion. So they exist for today and for tomorrow. So we have to cooperate. And I heard what His Excellency told about AI. I think we need, of course, regulation, we need discussion, but we need cooperation better than tension, because the topic is very difficult. And we need to have cooperation for strong regulation, but share regulation. And that's the reason why I think your place here in Abu Dhabi, in the Emirats Arab Unis, in this place, we can maybe have some works like efforts to make together some regulation, to make together some initiative to promote cooperation. And I think your place could be now a place where we can discuss for a new balance in the world. And a balance who says that if you want to be international, you have to work with China and you have to work with USA. We don't want to choose. We need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that note, do you feel like things might get better under President Trump between the US and China?
For me?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think,
of course.
I think that it's now a strategy of the American president. He wants to have a very hard and very speed flow of proposition. And he is moving always, and when you move always, you are not a target. So he moves always. And it's very difficult to I think it could be the same thing for a long time. We will have a pause. I don't know when, but I think we will have. Nowadays, we need to build strong cooperation, not aggressively, but positively, to make for our big topic good consensus. For example, right now, there is a consensus in all the youth everywhere, in Shanghai, in San Francisco, in Bangalore, in Abu Dhabi. Young people want to protect planet for protect humanity. It's a consensus for young people everywhere. So we have to work in this direction with the support of all the youth in all the time. So I think that the American president will have the conscience one day that young people from America are very close to young people from India, from Abu Dhabi, or from China. And that's the reason why I think that we need to make sustainable development one of our priority with the support of all. Yes. And one day, America will be back to the Paris Agreement as it was in the past.
Well, inshallah, as we say in this part of the world.
Inshallah.
Now, Minister, you touched on something very interesting, the concept of the permanent pandemic. And I think after several years of COVID, nobody wants to talk about pandemics anymore, but to you, this is something quite important that people should be talking about more. Why is that, and how would you define the permanent pandemic? What does that look like?
I think the most important aspect is, let's not forget, we came in 4.5 years ago back in COVID, and the pandemic was there. And one of my great swans is permanent pandemic, that there's going to be a pandemic on a permanent level. How do we work with that? How do we create kind of lesson learned that we learned from the previous pandemic, and how do we actually enact our systems? I remember the day when we started the ministry 4.5 years ago, when I took office in July 2020. One thing is that there was no textbook or toolkit to help you navigate a pandemic. And I think it was a big issue, not just me. When we look across the world, nobody knew how to react, how to, stabilize the economy from crashing. How do you look at the capital market? And so I think what's important is, how do we look at, nobody wants a pandemic again, but if it's be, then how do we react to it? How do we fix it? How do we have the right tools, measures to really look at it? And how do we build resilience in the corporate world? We've seen governments across the world give a lot of support, even us, to corporations, from facilities, from paying the debts to others. But can corporates be ready for a future pandemic? How can we build their resilience? What type of resilience that needs to be? Do they have a vision? Do they have a financial capacity to run? Do they have the right knowledge, shared across the corporation? So these are kind of issues that it's not just government needs to be ready for the future, for that swan in particular, but more to as well the corporates in the private sector and their readiness and their resilience for any pandemic in the future. Now, that type of swan is more going now to the lighter side. She's not darker as it used to be, but it's a more lighter gray swan, and I hope there's no more pandemics in the future as well.
Yes, and Monsieur Ravarin, talking about permanent pandemics, when we were all going through the COVID pandemic, I think we saw a lot of competition playing out through different spheres of influence and different geopolitical powers rather than collaboration. And there was competition, between, there were vaccines that were going to parts of the world from China, and then, certain countries in certain parts of the world were holding vaccines. And there was a lot of fragmentation in this regard, which is very harmful, especially to those in the developing world. And we're also looking at this at a time when now USAID funding has been slashed, and that was $70 billion annually that went to countries in need. And looking at this landscape, what do you think is the role of policymakers who can bridge those gaps diplomatically and economically in creating more resilient supply chains between countries that are not ordinarily friends, let's say?
I think that we have a role for the policymaker, of course, to develop the cooperation in that world. And for example, with China right now, they are very strong, if they have difficulties, of course, but they are very strong to promote, for example, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are very strong production in China. So they want to come in France, in Europe. And then we have, just like Trump, we have a lot of a scale of tariff to stop this very high waves. But I think it's not obviously the good way. We need to fight protectionism. We need to promote exchanges. You can be rich if you are open. If you are closed, you will be poor. And I think that we had in this period to develop what we can call, and this is a very important thing in China, cooperation in foreign countries, to invest together in foreign countries, to have multilateral funds to invest. Investment is the best way to prepare the future. And we need to work together to invest together. In the past, we sell, we buy. Now we build together. We have to invest together. We have to mix our capital to invest. And to invest, of course, in each country, but above all, to invest in foreign countries. And I think this way is very strong. For example, with China, France and China now invest in Great Britain about nuclear plant. We have cooperation. It's such a strategic target. So I think nowadays we have a lot of new funds, private equity, for example, family office, so a lot of funds now are everywhere, but we need to have common strategy to develop and to promote common projects which are good for planet, which are good for people, which are good to fight poverty. So I think that's a way of developing which is very strong right now. And point is that all this situation need to have a peaceful climate. And nowadays, in a lot of countries, they have too much violence. We need to make peace everywhere, to have peaceful attitude, positive attitude, to help the cooperation and to pay attention that all this violence everywhere is an obstacle to the development.
Well, on that note, when we look at, so staying on the topic of China, we are at the moment witnessing a potentially dramatic change in the so-called world order with the US President Trump, under President Trump, turning away from its traditional allies and its security umbrella now in question. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would cost the global economy $10 trillion, or about 10% of global GDP, according to economists. That dwarfs the blow from the war in Ukraine, from the COVID pandemic, and from the global financial crisis. Now, of course, you've been talking about the peace and peace and the need for peace, but the nature of a black swan event is that no one sees it coming. I would like to start with you, Monsieur Avarin, again for this one. Is this a realistic possibility in your view, or is it completely ridiculous? And if not, how is it best prevented?
I think now it's difficult to answer this question, which is very difficult. But my conviction is that in this time, China needs time to achieve their development. And they don't want war right now. They want to have development because they have a lot of poor people to get out of the poverty. So they have made a lot of job, but they have to do right now a lot of job too. So I think if the other nations are very responsible, we can have a very very long period to have development without too much agitation. So I think that right now there is a strategy with USA. You know, Mr. Kissinger said in the past, you don't make the Russia interest with Chinese interests, it's the same pot. When you are with China, you are against with Russia. When you are against Russia, you are with China. So I don't know if Mr. Trump follows this line. I don't know. But I think that we can avoid the war right now because a lot of countries now need development and not need destruction. There is nothing good in the war. And what is very awful today is that a lot of people are thinking that the war is possible. My generation don't want to talk about war. We have seen what it was, and we don't know that there is no good solution with war. There is no good perspective with war. So we need, of course, to avoid that. So I hope that at the end of the day, from the West, a peaceful wind will flow.
I hope so too. Now I want to touch briefly on global debts. Global government-held debt sits currently at $102 trillion, and over a third of that, $36 trillion, is held by the United States. Now, Minister Al-Mari, how would a U.S. debt crisis impact this region and the UAE, and what concerns you the most when it comes to debt crises globally or in a major economy?
I think the global debt crisis is not just on the U.S., it's on the world.
Yeah.
And I think a big chunk of the global debt crisis is private sector. And let me explain. That's one of the swans. There's a lot of, in the past 3.5 years, interest rates went so up because that's the only solution to reduce inflation, right? This is the kind of, policies to use to reduce inflation is to increase interest rate. But with that, private sector took on a lot of debt that had a very high interest. Now, when the interest rate goes down, what happens? The paying back of these debts at high interest rates would mean that there will be a huge implication on the private sector, huge implication on paying these debts. Now, this is a swan. I'm not saying it's happening. And I'm saying this is a prediction that we need to think about. And we need to think about how private sector is going to repay. Because some countries might, print some bills to pay the debts, right? And that's another thing. But private sector has agreements. Private sector has a lot of debts. And they took a lot of debt as well in the 3.5 years. So what we hope is the reduction of the interest rate in the next few years should be slowly and gradually, which the central banks in the world is actually doing that. There is actually kind of a soft landing or a slowdown, kind of reducing these interest rates, because if you go down so fast, there are going to be as well a challenge on the private sector in paying their debts because they took them at very high interest rates in the last 3 years.
Yes. And when you look at potential risks like we've been talking about earlier, de-dollarization and move away from more traditional routes of trade and of these alliances and of the reserve currencies, is there something that you think is more of a gray swan or a black swan in this regard?
I think it's one of the swans that flew away.
And what about you? Yes?
Flew away because of what we've seen today when the new administration in the U.S., there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of good policies happening, and I think it's important to note that. There's a huge emphasis. In the UAE, we are pegged to the dollar. We trade in the dollar. It's a big part of our central bank reserve, and we've always been with that strategy and policy. Now, with the kind of the change of the global order, I think there is a huge emphasis on the dollar coming back. I don't think that will happen in the swan. I think the swan flew away, and I think we should need to think about other challenges that might face the world. But I think this is something, the dollar will still be a huge part of our transactions globally and with our, as well, central banks around the world. And I think it's important to emphasize on that. Now, I don't think it's a topic that we will be seeing. It used to be last year. We had topics on this, but I think, thank God, it flew away. But I think what's happening is the world is as well understanding there should be new ways of transacting. There might be new financial systems of transacting and moving the money around the world. I think that's an aspect as well to keep an eye on. That might be interesting to see where that is happening, where is it going, how does the world transact, because what we're seeing in the region and globally, we're seeing more resilience in the countries. They're becoming more and more agile and more thinking futurely as well, how to prepare themselves if anything in the future happens from escalation, from conflicts, let's say. I don't want to say wars as well. But I think it's important to really think about these because these are important aspects that will create technology, will create ways and means of financial instruments.
And that is reassuring, and that is hopeful. And on that positive note, we are actually out of time. Although I could ask you many, many more questions, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists. Please give them a warm round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.